Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know folks are going to continue to join us throughout our opening, but I do want to make sure that we value your time and our speakers' time. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm going to give a few opening remarks. Then I'm going to ask a question, which we'll answer in the poll. Then I'm going to go ahead and hand it to our colleagues from Art.Coop, who will establish a little context. Then we're going to hand it off to our guest speakers, Carlton Turner, founder of Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, and Alan Guavena Frimpong, co-founder of Zeal. I'm Eddie Torres, President and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. I want to make clear that closed captions are available. So if any of you need closed captions, they are available on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. It's the button that says More. Just click on that, and there's usually a piece of text that says Live Transcript. Click on that, and you'll be able to get subtitles throughout today's presentation. Today's presentation is being recorded, and you'll be able to access the recording on our website. I'm Eddie Torres, President and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. I use he, him pronouns. For those of you who can't see me, I'm a cisgendered man with dark hair and eyes, a white beard. I'm wearing glasses. I have a brown blazer on, and I have a Zoom background of a library behind me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a moment. Grantmakers in the Arts vision for the future is one in which grantmakers in the arts have helped our field to become more than just arts grantmakers, but instead we become investors in culture, broadening the means and tools of support from just grants to private investments, etc. And who and what entities receive support, from organizations to artists, businesses, unincorporated entities, groups of community stakeholders, and others. Thanks to the great leadership of our Vice President and Director of Programs, Nadia Lokta, and our Senior Program Manager, Sherilyn Seeley, Grantmakers in the Arts has been sharing information about the solidarity economy since about 2018, 2019. And Grantmakers in the Arts have recently commissioned Solidarity Not Charity, Arts and Culture Grant Making in the Solidarity Economy by Natalia Linares and Caroline Woolard of Art.Coop. We're complementing that report with discussions of real-world solidarity economy work to make tangible the points that Nati and Caroline made in this report. Now, this discussion is part of a monthly series that is documented on our website. So please go ahead and go to our website to see the other discussions. We're going to be sharing a sign-in sheet so that you can share your information with Carlton and Alan and continue to receive updates from them. We'll also be sharing their presentations after this. This is part of Grantmakers in the Arts advocacy work as a complement with more hands-on, high-touch, artist-led organizing work. So I wanted to take a moment. There we are. Take a moment and just ask a question, two questions. And if you would respond with a plus, just respond to the chat. If you'd respond with a plus for yes or a minus for no. Basically, my two questions are these. So the first one is, would you be interested in our continuing these discussions with our adding to them time for you to speak to your peers about this work? That is to say, to break out into small groups and speak to one another about your efforts to increasingly embrace the solidarity economy in small breakout groups. So if the answer is yes, please go ahead and put a plus sign in the chat. And if the answer is no, please feel free to put a minus sign in the chat. Fantastic. Well, it looks like this is trending positive, so I'm happy to see that. So then our follow-up question is, would you like these discussions to include more technical information? For instance, how does one start a co-op? So if you would like to see more technical information, like how does one start a co-op, go ahead and put plus in the chat. And if that's not as exciting to you, go ahead and put minus in the chat. So lots of pluses. Way to go, Eleanor. Thank you. Good, good. Plenty of pluses. Okay, good. All right, again, I'm seeing a trend. This is excellent. Okay, good. Okay, so let us go ahead and kick this conversation off. I'm going to hand it off to our colleague Marina Lopez at Art.Coop, who'll provide a little further context, and then we are going to get to share the voices of Carlton Turner and Alan Kwabena Frimpong. Marina.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm just gonna get my screen share up. Can you see that? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you again so much, Eddie. As Eddie said, my name is Marina Lopez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in today from unceded Wiyot territory in far northern California. And the Wiyot people have been here since time immemorial. I am a co-organizer with Art.Coop. Nati, pictured here with the flower crown, and Caroline Woolard on the other side are the co-founders of Art.Coop. Their report, Solidarity Not Charity, Arts and Culture Grant Making in the Solidarity Economy, is what launched Art.Coop just about a year ago. And yes, today is the final session in this series of 5. And we've been really grateful for those of you who have gotten to join us for these really inspiring and educational conversations over the last 5 months. I also want to take a moment and thank Grantmakers in the Arts and Eddie for their continued support of Art.Coop's vision to grow the solidarity economy movement by centering artists and culture workers. We really appreciate your continued support. It's been a blast to co-present these sessions for each of you. And like Eddie mentioned, if you've missed any, they're available on GIA's website. They've all been recorded. And we're excited to continue the series, probably in late summer, early fall. So if there are other things, other dreams, other ways you want to engage in this space or things you want to learn, feel free to just message us in the chat, or you can email us. We definitely want to hear from you and craft a series that fits your learning needs. So as Eddie mentioned, we'll also be sharing a sign-up sheet for the session. So please add yourself so that you can stay in contact with our amazing presenters today. And it feels really right to be able to close out this series with a conversation with Carlton Turner, who's the founder of Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, aka SIP Culture, and Alan Kwabena Frimpong, the co-founder of Zeal, as they are both building and embodying the cultural economy that we want, using many of the tools that we've learned about in this space over the last 5 months. Things like creative cooperatives that allow artists to own the means of their creative production, providing equitable and joyful ways for artists to create and then pay the bills. And Art.Coop, we exist to grow this solidarity economy movement by centering systems change work that's being led by artists and culture bearers. As Nwamaka Agbo says, it's about community ownership plus democratic governance for political, cultural, and economic power. So in other words, it's about who owns and then who decides. And the Sustainable Economies Law Center has this great prompt that I've shared in every session because I feel like it's a really important question to continue asking and to ground us in the work that we're doing. And it goes like this: how will I or you spread wealth and spread power and root it in our hyper-local communities? So at Art.Coop, we do this when we connect cultural innovators across silos in the solidarity economy movement. when we amplify research and inspiration, resources, and events that lift up this work, when we move money to multi-year, self-determined systems change efforts led by artists, and when we study together in spaces like this hour to practice ways of spreading wealth and power and rooting it in our communities. Because most people have no experience with democratic decision-making at work, at home, online, or even in schools. So study is required to ensure that a culture of cooperation and the skills of democratic governance are learned and then practiced. And both of our speakers today are a part of cultivating spaces and communities of study that center arts and culture as vehicles to conduct that learning, growth, reflection, and vision making. And Zeal knows this and has responded by creating physical spaces for Black creatives to gather. They create a learning community for folks that exists outside of institutional spaces and is cultivated with intention. As Zeal co-founder Alan Frimpong, who we'll hear from today, says about their spaces, he says, "We liberate ourselves from economic behaviors of scarcity, of exploitation and extraction of our culture. We own the means of our production, and we make strong, vibrant, self-determined communities from that. And we can use art and culture to do that." In their report, Solidarity Not Charity, Nati and Caroline identified some really concrete ways that grantmakers can begin to create these kinds of field shifts. Things like internal work and governance, which I've spoken a little bit about in some of the previous sessions, and that can look like getting data about inequities in your existing allocation of funding, learning about, acknowledging, and repairing histories of harm enacted by institutions, and then setting both internal and external benchmarks and practices for repair. Also engaging in embodied leadership training that addresses social position, rank, trauma, and race. And those are just a few examples. It can also look like advocating for policies that support solidarity economy infrastructure, or taking a systems change approach in which collaboration, leadership development, and study groups are supported. And it looks like committing to long-term work with multi-year grants, loans, and equity investments for solidarity economy institutions and networks. And this commitment also looks like following the lead of those most harmed by our systems of oppression, who are leading systems change within their communities. And Carlton Turner, who you'll hear from today, was one of the folks interviewed for the report and speaks to this so beautifully. And he says that this work, when done with integrity, takes time. There is no quick way to get it done. It can't be microwaved. And SIP culture, formerly Alternate Roots, has been at it for 40 plus years. The results of asking and interrogating racism, Southern life, organizational structure, funding for artists, contracts, what does it mean to partner? These questions are real. If you have only done a year of work, lean on the organizations that have done the work and let them lead. Through their work, SIP Culture and Zeal are inviting us to reimagine the ways in which physical space can be used as centers of cultural production, and therefore foster community, connection, and innovate pathways of self-determination, all while centering the needs and dreams of Black and people of color artists and culture bearers. Their spaces are cultivated with intention to meet the needs of people that not only allow them to survive, but to thrive. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Carlton Turner. Thank you.
What's up, everybody? I'm trying to get this technical stuff done, and then I'll be right with you. Let's see if we can share a screen here. All right. So let me start by saying I come to you today from the land of the Choctaw, the Quapaw, the Yazoo, and the Natchez people, and now called Utica, Mississippi. And let me also start by saying that SIP culture is not formally alternate roots. I am Carlton Turner, who was at Alternate Roots in my previous job before starting SIP culture. So just wanted to clear that up. There are people on this call that would, have me drawn and quartered for that statement, but we're all good. So my family has been in this community of Utica, Mississippi for 8 generations. Each generation with an intimate relationship with the land. And in 5 generations, my family has gone from being brought here as forced labor in enslavement to my younger sister attaining her PhD in agriculture. We've always been aware of the connection between land and liberation, between traditional farming, climate change, and community health and wellness. We understand the agency that comes with the ability to tell our own stories and to define ourselves through art made by us and on our own terms. In 2017, my partner Brandy and I co-founded and we co-lead the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production. We started it as a generational approach to comprehensive community cultural development. And what that term means for us is that our community doesn't need a traditional arts space. It doesn't need a traditional community developer or real estate developer. What it needs is a comprehensive development of the culture. Because the culture that we have really been established in is a culture that doesn't adequately reflect our values as a community. And so we think about that community development as a comprehensive approach. Our work is defined by its proximity to and accessibility by our community. And community for us is defined by both our hyper-local geography, the town and community of Utica and the metro region, a wider regional designation that includes artists and cultural bearers from 5 states that surround Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, and a national commitment to cultural and racial equity that is in alignment with our partners and collaborators that stretch from Hawaii to Alaska, across the contiguous 48 into Puerto Rico. So the programs that we run, from an artistic standpoint, we have a program called the Rural Performance Production Lab. And in that program, we work with artists and culture bearers across that 5-state region. We provide them with awards, financial awards from $2,500 to $15,000 for the production of new work that is made by these Southern artists, with special attention to artists that are working and living in rural communities. They receive support in terms of mentorship, collaborative support, space to work, but also to work with artists, mentors, and other consultants over the course of an 18-month period. We provide for them an artist residency that is on our property at the White Oak Artist Residency Space, which hosts artists in a 3,000 square foot, 100-year-old office/residence. We also work to develop the Artist Relief Fund as part of our collaborative work with the founding partners of the Intercultural Leadership Institute, and that is the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, First Peoples Fund, Alternate Roots, and the Pa'i Foundation in Hawaii. Together, we leverage more than $6 million for artists, culture bearers, and small arts organizations to distribute during the pandemic. This program in the future will evolve from a pandemic response of artist relief into what we're thinking about as the Southern Futures Fund. The name is still to be determined, but this fund is for the radical renovation of the nation through the imagination of Southern artists. I'll say that again. This fund is to support the radical renovation of this nation through the imagination of Southern artists. And so those are a couple of the programs that we run from an artistic frame that help to really hold our work. The other part of our work is about food or agriculture. And that through that work, we have 17 acres of green space that's part of our rural campus. Of that, we have 1.5 acres in organic vegetable production. Through that space, through our SIP Culture Community Farm, we run a small farm apprentice program that trains young farmers in the no-till, sustainable, regenerative farming techniques over the course of an 18-month apprenticeship. The program pays a living wage of $15 an hour with full health benefits and 3 weeks of paid time off. We just installed on that property an 1,800 square foot climate controlled greenhouse to be able to have 365 days a year growing. And all the produce that we grow goes to support food sovereignty in our community with a focus on elders and families through a sliding scale CSA program. And so those are some of the programs that we put in to address some of these issues, this tremendous issue of food sovereignty in our community, a community that was founded on agricultural production and over the years has found itself reliant on grocery stores and then having those grocery stores pulled from under it. And now the only space available is the dollar store to get groceries. Otherwise, you have to travel, 20 to 25 miles one way to get to a grocery store just to get basic necessities. So there's some real challenges around the food system. The other part of our work is through research. And we think about research as, integral to being able to do quality work. One of the big projects that we've been working on is Equitable Food Futures, which is a partnership with Imagining America through a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Fellowship. And this work is looking at the role of storytelling on a community's ability to make decisions around their food systems. This is year 3 of a 3-year fellowship, which included community surveys, a participatory action research process that includes focus groups and oral histories. We will be developing our research brief this summer and completing our research by the end of the year, with the full research being available by the beginning of 23. We also have been working with Artists at Work program. We're partnering with the Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health System to explore community health and wellness beyond medical interventions through employing an artist to work as a liaison between our 2 organizations over the next 3 years to really identify cultural practices, artistic practices, social practice beyond medical facilitation to our overall community health and wellness. We're also partnering with the Utica Institute Museum to preserve community memory through oral histories related to the agricultural relationship, the cultural relationship, and the histories of Utica, Mississippi. And thinking about this work, we operate in community development, thinking about what are the infrastructures that our community needs to survive. So we began this work with an 18-month call and response process with our community. We asked them to help us in mapping our community by giving them a map of 4 locations, giving them a map of the Tri-County area and asking them to map 4 locations. Those 4 locations were: where do you work? Where do you live? Where do you shop? And where do you worship? And what we began to find out from that mapping process is that our community, which used to be a center of cultural production, has now turned into a bedroom community. The consensus was that our community had transformed from this cultural production center to a bedroom community. And I think the community knew that in some capacity, but this was the first time that they had put a name to it together. So I think individually our community had thought about what are we dealing with, what's happening in our community, and everybody had come up with their ideas separately, but this was an opportunity for them to name that together. And then what we offered next as an organization was a little more difficult. The question turned from asking us to kind of geospatially locate where we were in our evolution or life cycle as a community to understand whether or not we were content with what we had found out. And if we weren't content with that identity, then what identity did we want to appropriate? And once they began talking about what they wanted to do, once we began talking about what we wanted to do together, then what we realized that we needed a space for our community to bring their dreams. And culture and infrastructure changes along with that would allow for our community to then dream together. So my individual dream is different from my ability to dream together with my community. Those dreams they have a different consistency, a different makeup. And we know we needed infrastructure in order to hold those dreams. So we began building a comprehensive rural development campus that includes our 3,000 square foot office residency, which is the White Oak space, a 17-acre green space, which I talked about that we do the agricultural work on primarily, and community farm, and our newest development, which is a 4,000 square foot cultural center and commercial kitchen on Main Street. And so that space, we're beginning the development now. So we began to think about how to support this vision. In 2019, we began working with Olympic Community Development to begin the process of creating a comprehensive strategy to define this community space, a community space that is worthy of holding and advancing our collective dreams. So we recently contracted with an architect and builder to get this facility up and running by next summer. And we are in the pre-launch phases of our capital campaign to raise $2 million towards the design, build, and equipping of the Main Street Cultural Center, and 3 years of staffing, programmatic and staff support for that space. And we're also looking to acquire additional properties. So we're looking for $500,000 to purchase and renovate additional properties for artist housing, for just housing and residency space and office space. So one of the biggest threats to our community renewal practice is the lack of access to building and infrastructure. And so we're looking to purchase and renovate 2 additional properties in our community as our work expands and our need continue to grow. And so those are I just wanted to get through this kind of quickly because I'd rather be in conversation and have some more opportunity to answer questions. But that's really where we are. And I'm going to turn it back over to Marina.
Thank you so much, Carlton. And my apologies for that mistake. I really appreciate you clarifying that history and distinction. So we're going to open it up for questions. We'd love to have more space in this series to talk to one another. So feel free to put your questions in the chat or just come off mute, and I will pause for a minute to let people think and take in that information. The Zoom silence.
Can we just jump in?
Yeah, please.
I have a question and just would love to hear more. Carlton, you used the phrase bedroom community, but I'm not sure that we all know what that means or like what that means around how people are living. Can you talk a little bit more about what it means for Utica to show, for the mapping to show that it's a bedroom community and what that led to?
Yeah, thank you, and good to see you, Sage. So what happened was when we did the mapping, what we saw was as we laid the map out, and Utica is here in the center, that when people map where they live, they were mapping here. But when they map where they work, it was out there. And when they map where they shop, it was over here. And when they map where they work, it was over there. And so what we realized is that the only activities that we could pinpoint and geolocate in our community were sleeping. So people didn't work here, people don't shop here, people don't even go to churches in many of the family churches that they were raised in. They now go to urban spaces for worship. And worship was a really important part for us because if you see the landscape of the map, you see these churches almost geometrically dotted across the land, which that church configuration had its own unpacking. So our architect asked us, was like, so why the churches seem like they've been placed, like someone placed them, they're not placed randomly. They're like in these geometric forms. And I began to explain to them that the churches represents the physical spaces that the enslaved populations were used to worship before, while in the plantation configuration. So when you have plantations and you have bodies of people that lived there, they would find these locations to worship on that plantation. So when emancipation came, they then began to erect physical buildings in the same places where they were already worshiping. And so you have these churches that actually indicate the plantation populations. So many people have left those communities, and what we found, left those churches going to other churches in bigger areas, urban areas. So what does that mean for a community that used to be a center of production that had all of the nuances of like rural urban life, like it had the country store, it had the hardware store, it had a dentist office, it had a doctor's office, it had, an auto parts store, it had the butcher shop, it had, cafes and places to go for recreation. What happens when all of that, when those systems begin to break down? What does that leave for the community? And in many people's mind, they have been critiquing a community that no longer exists. So they're concerned about a community. They're saying, well, we don't have this, and we should have this, and we should have these other things, without having a nuanced conversation about how we got from point A to point Q. And that conversation, those stories that exist in that A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way through, those are the stories of our community, and they unlock what we understand as our community trajectory. So through storytelling, that's the research process of gathering that information and being able to unpack what is actually happening in our community, to be able to then figure out, now, how do we use this information to advance a different type of trajectory towards an identity that we choose for ourselves? Because much of what happened in the breakdown of our community were based on decisions that were made from people that live outside of our community. And so when we talk about agency, that's what agency means for us, is that we get to decide what trajectory we're going to be on as a community.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we'll take one more question. So Karen Hott asks, the nourishment of art and culture and the nourishment of food is so intertwined. Can you talk more about how you lift this up at SIP? And it's in the chat too, if you need to reference.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally this just goes back to food. As a young person, when I grew up in this community, I grew up around people who all had a contribution to make to the culinary life, to the food life of our community. Everybody grew something. Everybody had something. Whether my grandfather had the smokehouse, and he had his hogs, and he had chickens and turkeys, and he produced vegetables and meats. Down the road was Mr. A.C. Ferguson. He had his own contributions. And somebody had a watermelon patch, and somebody grew butter beans, and somebody grew sugar cane. And all of these contributions made food a central identity for the community makeup. And so when you have that, those stories of people growing up, so I'm 47, when we talk to people older, in the older generation, they even have more visceral memories because they remember doing that work. They remember being in the mix of those things, as they were, they didn't have grocery stores that they relied on. They got 80 to 90% of the food that they ate came from their yard and from the yards of their community members. So you move from that to a place of relying on a grocery store. And what was that shift? What did it mean? How did it change the community? And then you move from the shift of having a grocery store to no longer having a grocery store. What was that journey? What did that mean? What were the changes that were happening politically? What was happening in the community? What was happening in the country? And how can we map that continuum so that we can understand where we are on that journey? What is the current place that we are as a community? How can we be in more control of our future destination by taking some agency in this moment? So those are the ways that, for us, the story, everybody has a story about food. You can't find anybody that doesn't have a story about food. Everybody, whether they get their food from a local source, or whether they get it from a grocery store, or whether they home cooked meals, or whether they like a particular type of food. Food story is an entry point to community development. That's what food becomes. It becomes the place in which we can have a comprehensive conversation about what the current situation is in our community, what it used to be, and what we want it to be in the future.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I saw there were a few more questions coming into the chat, but I think let's save those for the end. And we'll make sure that if we don't get to answer them in this conversation, we will send out an email with some follow-up. So yeah, we'll pass it on to Alan.
Oh, this is amazing. I'm really just enjoying the conversation, and thank you for the presentation, Carlton. There's just a lot that I even have questions on. I know that we don't have time, but we create more time outside of the call. But Art.Coop and Frimpong, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? How folks feeling, okay? I just want to invite you into some sound before I actually do my presentation. I'm just feeling called to do that. So if you can hear, just paying attention and allow yourself to be in tune and attuned to the sound around you as you hear, but I just feel called to play this. So. So Alan Kwabena Frimpong here. Kwabena is born on a Tuesday of the Akan people in Ghana, West Africa. So my folks are from Ghana. My dad is of the Ashanti people. And we know that the Ashanti people also have their lineage and roots with the Gullah Geechee people in South Carolina. And so, as a second generation Ghanaian who is from Newark, New Jersey, I'm happy to join y'all on the call. And I now live in Inglewood, California, on the lands that are stewarded by the Tongva people. So I went from the Lenape land to now the Tongva land, and I just moved out here to Inglewood back in December. But as mentioned on the call, I am a co-founder of Zeal. Along with my other co-founder, Walter Cruz and Phyllis Quento. We started Zeal in 2018 as a cooperative for Black artists who have these aspirations to thrive, to create spaces for Black artists to thrive. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all so that you can see. You can let me know if you see what you need to see on here. But as a cooperative for and by Black artists, we really believe that this gives us the opportunity to liberate ourselves from this concept of individualism in the journey to finding the co-op. I've been working in philanthropy for almost 15 years, and to be honest, as many of the folks on the call, I was once a program officer, but I also had these really personal passions around my own artistic creativity. The instrument that I played at the start of the sharing is the jili, which is, as we know in English, is the xylophone. And the time that it takes for someone who plays the jili to actually build it, right? Because this jili is made of wood, mahogany wood. And Carlton just talked about cultural production, like the actual raw material resources from the land that it takes for an artist to take the time to do that, have the accessibility. Like back in Ghana, I can just go to a mahogany tree, cut the wood and then think about what are the supplies that I need to do that. Am I making those supplies? Am I purchasing those supplies? And if then I'm purchasing them, do I have the money and the resources to actually then do so? So these are all the questions that, come up as an artist is in their cultural production. And I'm saying this is around creating an instrument. But at Zeal, what we are constantly thinking about is the economic systems that we're in, and the ways that we're giving Black artists the opportunity to thrive across a value chain set that says through creation, production, distribution, and then interrogating the distinctions that we're making between the producer and then the piece around consumers. Where are there opportunities for us to actually cooperate together so that we can actually be sufficient? As Carlton mentioned, in being self-determined in the communities in which we live in. And so if we understand that we're in an economic system of capitalism that says, only the few deserve to get what they need, and not only get what they need, but get it at a surplus and hoard wealth and resources that continuously extract and exploit from land and labor and continue the vestiges and the legacy of slavery in the context of this transatlantic slave trade, where can then we have the ability to shift our mindset, shift our collective ways of being, and do the necessary continuous ancestral healing work to be able to own and steward the means of our cultural production in creating community wealth. And so in doing so, these are the values and principles of the cooperative that we built when we started Zeal back in 2018, and we were founded in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from, Jersey City, obviously family from Ghana and West Africa, but using and evolving some of the signifiers of the Adinkra symbols of the Ashanti people in Ghana to be able to uplift our values through love, joy, grace, and abundance, and that we strive to embody these values with enthusiasm, expectancy, and excitement. Hence the word zeal. Zeal was actually created really as a spiritual conception amongst Phyllis, myself, and Walter, because we had this vision of what would it look like to create a community, a learning community where artists can learn to cooperate and collaborate so that we can meet the needs to be able to support our communities through arts and culture, and that we can learn what it means to be democratically controlled, to make our own decisions without being codependent on systems that have stripped away our ability to be to be collectively righteous in our ability to know what it means to make discernments in our choices and then make decisions that will mutually benefit us towards our own needs equitably. And thinking globally and acting locally became really important for us as we started to experiment on these endeavors of what are the things that we can create together as artists that will benefit our communities. The first product that we produced in service to as an artifact to people in our immediate communities was a postcard booklet that featured artists that were at the early stages of developing the cooperative together. And through these values and through these cooperative principles that we put forward, it really then gives us the space to be able to say, all right, what are the things that we want to be able to source as vehicles that support us in that cultural production? So from our early beginnings in starting out Zeal in creating a in creating this postcard booklet that served in kind of the zine coffee table book-like format back in 2018, and hosting these artist salons in Brooklyn really led us now going into 2022, really the core areas of our development as a cooperative, in that now we have a brick and mortar in Inglewood, California. And that community incubator program really is a space where not only artists, but now in this current iteration and working with community stakeholders, is a space where we can collaborate with businesses like Hank's Mini Mart, which is right around the corner from where I'm at right now in Inglewood, to have discussions around, for instance, how gentrification is impacting the neighborhood of Inglewood and the displacement of many families and changing the social landscape and the fabric of that community. And so very similarly to what Carlton presented on in terms of the work that is happening at Sip Culture, a lot of the work that's happening through the Community Studio Incubator is getting other Black cultural institutions, such as Residency Art Gallery, Solar Contemporary Art Gallery, working with the small Black-owned cafes in the area to figure out across a value chain what could it look like to work with the city metro to say, not only are we using art to beautify this community and working with Hank's Mini Mart, but what about the arts program and the youth development program around the corner from our brick and mortar space that was lost by the development of the light rail that runs through Crenshaw and Inglewood? What are the ways in which we can build anew what has been lost? And so we're actually currently in a planning process around that through this community studio incubator program. So the program that originally started as a artist incubator for artists locally in the community to produce their work is now shifted into this community studio incubator. And then the other facets of Zeal allow us to focus through our membership on artist development and program that allows for artists to share their skill sets amongst each other within the cooperative, which has been a mainstay since the cooperative has been developed. And using those Skillshare experiences to then create a pool of creatives that are able to support brands, other cultural institutions, and their own cultural production work. And then you see at the bottom the ways in which we think about generating revenue as a cooperative as well. Which brings us to the type of memberships levels that we've developed as a cooperative. And currently as worker owners, we establish a process in which we want to be able to invite people and develop people into the values and principles that we espouse. And what we've learned is, even in the three years of our development, that it's not a small notion to be able to invite Black artists into a co-op with a variety of lived experiences, strengths, and stories that they're bringing to the table in terms of their work. Not only here in Inglewood, but through the roots of the work that we've done in Brooklyn, New York. And I'll soon talk about the work that we've done over the past 2 years in Miami through our exhibition work with visual and performing artists. But you see that we pool our resources through membership dues. We're able to do that in such a way where that then provides the floor for the shares in the cooperative. And then through the work that we're able to produce, we're able to then think about how the surplus that we make every year is then equitably distributed amongst the cooperative members. And then through our roles as worker owners in the cooperatives, we're also making decisions about the co-op. In the past 2 years, we've had to make a lot of decisions about the space that we've gotten in Inglewood and how we're using the space in ways that are supporting the local community here in the neighborhood. And these slides really just give you an idea with visuals, because this is actually the slide that we use for orientation, that walk potential members and current members around how it is we're thinking about our economy and the way that we are generating resources and then using them to regenerate the resources needed not only to support the co-op, but then the artists who are producing work in their various and variety of mediums in the visual and performing arts in service to the local community. So that being said, one of our first artists that was in the incubator space in Inglewood was Devin B. Johnson, who is from Los Angeles and grew up in the neighborhood. And, his story is great because as somebody who's local to his community, he went to New York City to Pratt art school. And then when he came back, he needed a space to produce work and to be able to exhibit his first work. So we partnered with Residency Art Gallery, which is literally 4 minutes from the space. And his opportunity to be able to host open studios where people locally in the community can be curious to find out who is this artist producing work in the space. And then also to find out that he was working with a local Black-owned gallery in a space that's actually owned by Todd Gray. We currently lease the building. And so he was able to subsidize rent to Zeal when we first started and decided to get the space through the relationships we built through our salon programming. Devin was able to produce not only his work, but then be able to support Zeal through the selling of the work, being able to cut a percentage that supported Zeal with the rent, but then all of the artists engaged in the co-op were then able to support him with his materials and resources to produce the work. And all of the work that he had for a solo exhibition was able to not only be sold out, but then also he was able to make limited edition of works accessible to community members who wouldn't be able to afford the work at the rate that it was being sold at. And now he's signed to a major art art gallery. And so now we're encountering what it means for a Black artist to be at a traditional gallery and institution while also having their roots within a cooperative that is still working locally in the communities. And so what are the ways that then Devin gives back to the community from which he's from, while also supporting other artists who are coming up in their own careers. So I just wanted to share that piece, and then I'll stop here in terms of where we are in terms of how we're engaging in the market collaboratively rather than competitively. But we have been able to engage many partners here in Inglewood and also through our work in Miami. And so about 2 years ago, we had our first major exhibition that got us some notable news in the front cover of the arts and culture section of the New York Times called Who Owns Black Art? Because we found in our short journey for many of us who had been engaging in the visual and performing arts world that if Black artists are expected to be cultural stewards in their community and to invest in their communities through art and culture, what are the ways that we can do that through the community building aspects of the work, through these mastermind salons that we've been hosting since the organization's inception, that allow us to have these conversations about what it takes for Black artists to thrive and what are the things around money that may have been challenging to one's creativity, and how do we transmute that? And having those honest conversations in communities with artists, whether we're in Brooklyn, New York, Inglewood, California, or in Miami, Florida. And those community building activities allow us to be able to engage who could be potential members of the cooperative that flow into the model that we currently are implementing and piloting out. And then lastly, we're thinking about the digital age and this digital space. What are the ways that we can mirror what is happening in the physical form in the digital? And so we're currently also in a conversation about what does it mean for us to be in the Web3 space and be so in a way that holds the integrity and ethics of how the cooperative operates, and making sure that artists are able to own the means of their production and do so in a cooperative manner. So that being said, I think in the same light, I also want to be able to give space possible for questions that folks may have about the co-op. But I also just wanted to show these are the current principal members of the co-op, myself, Sinead, who's actually also the founder of Millions March, Tia Oso, formerly of the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, myself, it's also mentioned I'm the co-founder for Liberation Ventures with the work happening on reparations, Walter Cruz, who was a part of the Black Lives Matter national network, but all of the people who are part of ZIL in some way, shape, or form are grounded and informed by their movement and organizing work, which is part of our process in terms of the people who we've had become a part of the cooperative. And then lastly, here's our advisory board. So I'll stop there, but I'm really thankful to Grantmakers and the Arts and Arts.Coop to be able to share in space with all of y'all.
Thank you so much. This presentation has been just really inspiring. And if folks have questions, please, I see Kate raise her hand. Go ahead.
Hello. First, hi, Alan, and everyone that I recognize on this call. It's wonderful to be connected with all of you. Question for you, Alan. The cooperative and collectives, I find work on some balance of relational management and value purpose management. That's what sort of drives and holds the glue together. And clearly you all have thought through your value purpose ties. I'm curious to know what practices you do along the relational management amongst members, and sort of how do you hold that sort of cultural space amongst each other?
Oh, that's a very good question. So just giving you an on-ramping process to ZIL's membership. So the relational process is also really key in animating those principles and values. Members actually develop what we call a letter of ascension. And that letter of ascension actually details what are their personal and creative intentions to want to create with each other in the cooperative. And so they pretty much in their entry point are sharing with the cooperative, here's economically my intentions and aspirations, and here's where I need support. Here are my wellness aspirations. I want to be well when I create. What does that look like for me? And also, what are like my personal familial relationships rooted in my community? And what are my goals and aspirations for while I'm at Zeal to do that? And in the first 90 days, they're basically having engagements with the current cooperative members and paired with an accountability buddy, and ensuring in those first 90 days of their time in the cooperative that they're able to see how those intentions then manifest in their goals. So that's actually one of the key core ways that we are acculturating people into a space where they can practice what it means to cooperate, especially if this is their first time in a cooperative, right? Which for many, of course, surprise of our artists, this is their first time. And so being able to heal from the stories of what has happened when they've been at other arts and cultural institutions has been a mainstay too, which is why we host the salons. They're in some ways kind of like your 15-minute venting session. And then once people have their space to like relax, then they can actually be with each other and actually figure out what are the ways that we want to work together. So again, and it takes time to do that. I think in the 3 years that we've been able to develop the co-op, and we're still learning, we're still iterating that process as we go.
I have a question for you, Alan. Thank you so much. I'm reflecting on the importance of place and thinking about Carlton's presentation as well. And just wanted to hear, how did you all decide on Englewood? You have a lot of connections in different physical places. Why was Englewood the right place for you all?
It ended up being the right place really based on an invitation. I actually, outside of my mom moving out here, we were in Brooklyn, and it wasn't until we went to we actually went to Art Basel Miami in 2018 that we heard about the burgeoning of Black artists within LA who needed support. And so I really took a chance along with Tia at the time, Tia also, who at the time was at Revolve Impact. And we started doing salons out there. And, it wasn't to our surprise that, based on our vision, the same kind of pain points were around space for artists to produce work, in particular for visual and performance artists, especially in LA where, yes, there's a huge TV and film industry here and music industry here, but as far as those spaces in the creative industries were concerned, a lot of the pain points actually started to mirror a lot of what we were seeing in in Brooklyn. And so Englewood ended up becoming the space just because of the unique nature of what is happening in this neighborhood. And also, I think, just quite frankly, the ways in which Black artists were also just being overlooked, So I think it provided a unique opportunity. And it really was to the credit of Shel Barbour and Todd Gray, both elders in this community. Todd Gray is actually our landlord at the property who subsidizes our rent, and also was Michael Jackson's photographer. And it really was both of them who helped kind of ground Zeal in Englewood as local residents. And also advisors to Zeal. So there's that intergenerational connection too, when you have your elders who are like, yeah, we want to be investing in this community, and also we want to be able to ward against the gentrification that's happening here.
Thank you.
So I'm afraid we're at time. I am so sorry to have to wrap us up, but I do want to be respectful of your time, and I know people are going to need to click off. Like I've said, this is for us at Grantmakers in the Arts, where we have so historically foregrounded the Grantmakers perspective, an opportunity for us to foreground the artist's perspectives. And it's really been an honor to have you. And, just to be explicit on our end, we also do this because we do want folks to support your work, Carlton, and your work, Alan. So please support the work that's being done by Zeal and the work that's being done by Sip Culture. And so if you sign up. You can continue to receive information directly from them. You can always reach out to me to receive their contact information. Likewise with any of the artists that we've presented throughout this series. And we're looking forward to re-engaging in the fall. I am really, really grateful, Alan Quabin of Frimpong and Carlton Turner and Marina Lopez from Art.Coop. I also want to say a great big thank you to Caroline Woolard at Art.Coop and Natalia Linares and so many of our peers who are here with us during this call. I just want to close out by saying a great big sincere thank you to all of you. Thank you.